to Barry here. As I say, we've got about 19 people. I'm just looking at that are registered, so we may have a few people sort of come and go, but use the chat function to drop any questions in. Barry, would you mind? Slide 2. Barry's driving the slides today. So what we're talking about here is broader digital accessibility, which is obviously an emerging area, an emerging career for a lot of people. In particular, we're talking about the digital accessibility specialist level 4 apprenticeship standard. Now, this is where we will lose some people because it's an apprenticeship standard in England. It is funded by the English government for people that are working for employers based in England. We tried to cover that in the sort of the text on Eventbrite, but just in case anyone missed it. So if you're outside of England, funding would be an issue for this. We would have to look at sort of commercial arrangements. The qualification is 18 to 24 months, followed by 5 months of endpoint assessment. It doesn't take 5 months. Barry will touch more on endpoint assessment, but certain assessments that happen after the teaching and learning, professional discussions, projects, Q&A, multiple choice questions. So there is an assessment process at the end of the qualification, which is administered externally, so it's not administered by us. If you're with the UK or an English organisation, this is funded 100% through the apprenticeship levy, so there's no cost to pay. If you're working for a small organisation who isn't a levy employer, 95% is funded through government, and the 5% balance is funded through the employer, but that can be staggered. And we've been enrolling onto this. This is a brand new program. We've been enrolling onto this since November. So we've got a handful of people that have already started. So anyone joining would do individual one-to-one teaching and learning, but also we do some interactive group sessions. And finally, the program is accredited by IAAP, as you can see on the slide, and gives access to membership, provided you're still working in this sector or working towards a qualification. Thanks, Barry. The way that we deliver is that we set out from day one to tailor the program around you and your employer, what you know already, what you don't know, what you may be an expert in. So all programs are tailored on a one-to-one basis. This isn't a one-size-fits-all qualification. We individualise the content as much as possible around you, projects you might be running, how frequently you want support sessions, teaching and learning. So everything we do is very much aimed on a one-to-one delivery model with, as I mentioned, small group delivery sessions. There's no large cohorts. We don't have 20 people all going through at the same speed. It's not that kind of a qualification. It has to be delivered at the right pace, the right level and the right frequency. And that's one of the beauties of working on an online face-to-face model, that although you may have agreed to see us in 3 weeks' time, if you need us for 20 minutes, you just got to message us and we'll just slot in between appointments and make sure you've got that support. Thanks, Barry. I've already touched on frequency and the flexibility of support. High-level teaching and learning, very much tailored to the individual. At the right frequency and level. You might join us, for instance, you might be a project manager, you might be an IT manager, you might be someone in compliance, and those starting points are going to be very, very different. Some people will have technical expertise, some people will have administrative expertise. So the teaching and learning is very much tailored, as are the group sessions, around individuals in the same place, of the qualification and of experience. So we don't like people being sort of out of their depth. We run low caseload numbers for a training provider. That just gives us the flexibility to support people when they need to. But rest assured, we do have 4 decades of experience and our customer service is second to none. So we will be here with you throughout, dogs and all. Thanks, Barry. I can see you. All apprenticeship qualifications are built around a set of KSBs, designed by industry, designed by employers, saying these are the knowledge, skills and behaviours that I want this person to have when they come out the other end. If I'm creating a specialist here, I need them to know certain technical aspects. I need them to have empathy when they're working with learners with disabilities. So the knowledge, skills and behaviours are all mapped out in the framework at the beginning. All the teaching and learning is then aimed at the knowledge. The skills is where you then put that knowledge into practice. And the behaviours is pretty much as it says on the tin, how we behave on a day-to-day basis, how we interact with each other, others on the programme, and most importantly, how we interact with our new client base, the people looking for digital accessibility. Thanks, Barry. That's probably enough from me on that one.
Yeah, this is where I take over then. So as Stuart's obviously mentioned there, so he's obviously done sort of the business side of stuff, so I'm being the tutor. So I'm going to start to talk now more in depth about the actual digital accessibility side of this. So the way that I deliver the models, the way I've been building the program, because as Stuart mentioned there, we started the program around about November-ish, but I've been in the background making a lot of the sort of resources and the curriculum, learning plans and so on for this particular new standard, this new apprenticeship. So where do I give it? So my background has been, I've been 13 years, I've been in the education sector. So now I'm moving more towards obviously that sort of online apprenticeship sort of side of stuff. So now I'm making sure I'm putting that into this new standard and kind of building this program from scratch. So what I'm going to do then for the next sort of 20 minutes or so, just talk you through what the program does, what it covers, but also some fundamentals around accessibility to make sure we're all kind of on the same page when it comes to looking at accessibility. So we'll look at what the common mistakes are, what people think about with accessibility, but also what people think about actually, oh, I've made that accessible, or what are some of the issues that we kind of see every day. What accessibility is and is not. So that's a big area we'll have a look at. What's in it for your organization? That's going to be a big key point for you because obviously as an apprentice, as someone who's working for a particular employer, you're going to make sure the employer gets something out of it, but also the employee gets something out of it as well. And then what makes a digital accessibility specialist? So what makes you someone who's just a layman who knows little bits and pieces about accessibility? How do we get to that level 4? How do we get to that specialist element of it? And then we're going to look at the legal and compliance framework. Now, a lot of the reasons why accessibility is on a lot of people's radar at the moment is because there's new legal frameworks that are coming into place. You may know a little bit, you may know nothing, but actually this is what is actually increasing the sort of the scope of accessibility and how much we should be working towards looking at accessibility in our organizations. And then I'll break down what the actual program looks like month by month or rather module by module. And then finally, what our delivery model is. So what have I been working on from a teaching and learning perspective to make sure we're giving you the best sort of diet in terms of what the actual delivery method is and how we're looking for your accessibility needs, but also your learning needs at the same time as well. So, quick little example then. Now, thank you, Andrew. You've exactly exemplified my point there. So the fact that you've had to zoom in to actually see that, that is exactly what the point is. All right. So this is a very visual example about a poor version of what accessibility is or is not, should I say. All right. So for someone who's got 20/20 vision, no blind impairment or anything like that, that's always hard to see. You know, you've got the color background, you've got the different fonts, you've got the different colors. It's just not good to see from even anybody's point of view. But unfortunately, there are issues like this that happen pretty much every day. So hard to read font, low color contrast ratio. So there is such a thing as obviously, you know, a white background, black text. It's usually the preferred format because it's actually probably one of the best ones to go with. But you know, there are a lot of these mistakes that still get made. This one, which on the face of it doesn't seem that bad. You know, you might think, well, you know, the font seems fine, the background seems fine. It's just kind of a bit of a login sort of page. But actually, that number one, what Red needs from you is all in capital letters, all caps text. Now, for someone who is maybe autistic or maybe on the spectrum or has particular other sort of cognitive impairments, for example, or someone who's got literacy issues, that actually reads quite difficult because we know that sometimes text speak, you know, it seems like you're shouting, but realistically what happens is if someone's also got an English as a second language, they've not been taught to read stuff all in capital letters. They're probably used to seeing a set defined model of what a sentence structure should look like or what words should look like. So therefore seeing all that in caps is that a bit more confusing. Therefore you're creating that inaccessible barrier for certain words or just text that you want to convey. And this one, my personal favorite, is closed captions are everywhere. You know, you watch Instagram, you watch Facebook, anything you've got, they'll always have the closed captions. It's becoming quite useful. Now, of course, anyone who's deaf, it's obviously useful for them. But also, if you're in a quiet room, you don't want the sound on, that's always really useful. But in this one here, it gives you obviously the brackets and it says it tries to set the tone. Now, this one, it's saying in normal voice. Now, of course, for someone who's been deaf since birth, in normal voice does not mean anything. You know, what does that mean? So this one here is just been about imprecise or useless captions, basically. All right. Andrew, feel free to chip in.
When you see something legally written and it will come in, I can't remember what the quotes are, and you refer to someone else saying something verbatim, but you haven't said it, would that come under this if it was misread? Because it's really saying, I'm not taking responsibility for it, but I've read something that someone else has said.
Yeah, so you look at quotations and so on. I think the way of looking at it is basically what is plain English? How is it that you're putting it out there? So I think in this particular case, something that always is really, really shocking for everyone is if you want something to be read by the general public, it needs to be read by someone who has got the reading age of a 9 to 12-year-old. So therefore, it's always about like how accessible is the text that you're putting out there. It's all well and good just putting out quotes and all this, that, and the other, but actually how well can people interpret those texts? So as long as you know you've done the best that you possibly can, even if you put a little disclaimer in to say this is additional text or this might mean this, or you might have a little glossary next to it or something like that, you know, something like that is always really, really quite useful. And again, it just means a lot for someone who is reading that, who, you know, realizes that you've probably gone that little bit extra to do that. So I think that's always quite useful. Does that help? Oh, thank you. So what accessibility is and is not. Now, the picture in the middle is a little bit misleading. Or comes out in a second. But either way, why accessibility? You want to create a digital world that is easier to access for everyone. It's that word, everyone. All right. We're not looking at this for someone who's got a disability, who's got a hearing impairment, who's deaf, for example. It's something for everybody. All right, so like I mentioned about closed captions, we all use it in Facebook and watching videos and stuff now, but actually originally it was used for someone who was deaf. All right, so it's making sure that if you're doing something for someone who's maybe disabled, it's probably going to be useful for everybody as well. It increases your inclusivity, making sure you can include everyone, not just making something that's nice to have, right? It improves your search engine optimization, your SEO, so you appear higher in the search results. So for example, if you're a company and if you know that your website is actually compliant in this area and you've done this for accessibility, it will appear higher in the search results from Google. All right. So again, that's always going to be good for anyone. Legal requirement is increasing in many sectors. So there's new legislation that's coming in at the end of June. So it's EU legislation, but it is affecting us if you are selling something or you've got an EU market or you've got some sort of reach in the EU. All right. So that is a big area that we need to look at. It also demonstrates commitment and champion to accessibility. So your brand reputation is obviously looking good from this as well. So for example, Beyonce's website was sued a couple of years ago, which I can't imagine did her fans much a favour. And what accessibility is not. So hence the picture, it's not a button or an accessibility function. A lot of people from the tech background, they say, oh, it's fine. I've got WordPress. I've got an overlay. WordPress do something. They do this. But actually, realistically, it's not that. It's not about a function. It's not an overlay. Overlays might hit maybe about 60% of issues. There's actually a lot of elements that a human will still need to be part of this process. It's not about catering for one disability. It's not a quick and a short-term fix. It's a process. You've got to start and then you building and building and building. It's not only for people with disabilities. It's not expensive or time consuming, as his apprenticeship shows. You know, you can get most of it funded. And it's not simply about legislation, right? So there's a lot of what it is, but also what it is not. So then what's in it for your organization? Now, I've come along about what accessibility is and is not. A lot of people say, well, my website, I've looked at it, I've made sure I've got this function, it's got this WordPress plugin and all the rest of it. So I'm happy with my website's fine. But actually, if you look at the Venn diagram there, your website makes up a tiny, tiny element of digital accessibility. All right, so this Venn diagram, it covers compliance, culture, and education, and that is across your whole organization. So it's not about the individual making sure the website works fine. You've got to make sure you're looking at it from a compliance, you're looking at the legal aspect of it. You've got a culture of accessibility and inclusivity in your organization, and you're also educating and training your staff. And that is what the fundamental part of the digital accessibility specialist is. Yes, you might be training one person, but again, they've got this wider remit to make sure that someone in the compliance team is working with them, or someone in the education and training team is working with them, and they are the go-to person with that. So it enhances user experience, massive, massive element towards this. You know, if you've not got a good user experience for your disabled or other people, they're not going to return. It's as simple as that. Increases usability of your digital space. Again, not just a website, your whole user space. Anything you're putting out there in the public domain, you've got to make sure you've looked at what the accessibility element of that is. This is another, again, one people don't think about. If you are looking at accessibility, it taps into the largest digital user group in the world, and those are people with additional access needs. So anyone who's aged, for example, you know, people who are older, obviously they're going to have problems with their vision, they're going to have problems with their hearing, they might need additional things that you might not even have thought about. People who are disabled, people with low reading ages, people with mental health issues, these are all people with access needs. If you're not working towards some element of making sure those people can access your digital space, you are missing out on a big portion of the market. It creates more diverse and innovative workforce. So not only about reaching out for those customers, but also working with those people inside your organization as well. All right, you start to think about things that you've probably never thought about in your organization before, and therefore it's worth considering. And won't go through all these ones individually, but you can see that these are some of the elements that we cover off when you are looking at someone who's a digital accessibility specialist. So you look at the guidelines, your technical skills, so HTML, which is spelled that was one way around, but never mind. JavaScript, best practices of digital security, project management, conducting workshops. All right. So these are all the different individual elements that a digital accessibility specialist will look at, and how we're going to be working with you on that over across that 24-month program as well. If an element within that can be tailored. So if your organization knows that you are quite good with digital security, for example, well, then we might just cover that in its basic form, and then we might concentrate a little bit more on HTML and JavaScript, for example. So you get set additional tasks as part of that as well, or the how-to guides, or other little interactive activities as well as part of that. All right, so all of these can be individualized elements based upon you as an individual, but also your employer's individual needs as well. So this one, WCAG or WCAG, all right? So this is something that we need to actually have a look at, because this is like the international standard, all right? This is the stuff where they say, these are the guidelines where everyone's trying to work towards. And they say, there are 3 levels of compliance, which we'll have a look at in a second. But these are what people say, well, are you accessible? Are you accessible to a WCAG standard, all right? So that's why they measure themselves against this international standard. There is different versions of the standard, so they kind of update it each sort of time. So at the moment, the full guidelines are WCAG 2.2. The WCAG draft 3.0 came out back end of middle of December. So this is like a draft, so it's going to take a while before that's like a full set of guidelines anyway. But these set out the guidelines of like how compliant or non-compliant you are. So your success criteria is you've got A, double A, triple A. A being a basic, double A being kind of like the set sort of standard one, and then double A is probably the most sort of most stringent of the requirements, right? So what you do, there's different elements, there's different success criteria within this, and you'll measure your organization, your website, your digital space based upon how these standards are being measured and how accessible they are according to these standards. The reason why this is important is because for us in the UK, there was something that came out in 2018. So if you are in the public sector, so for example, local government, central government, charities, maybe further education, then you were part of this legislation where you had to make your website, your apps, your digital space compliant to WCAG standard by 2020. So that includes like people like NHS, for example, or your local government, for example. So for most businesses, that didn't really cover them. It was covering just the public sector. However, more recently, we've got the European Accessibility Act 2025. And like I said, this comes into being from June 28th, 2025. And it don't be fooled by the European aspect of it. Yes, it's a European law. Yes, we're not in the EU anymore as a UK, but actually anyone who has any sort of market reach, or anyone who sells goods, or anyone who's maybe got some particular arm or reach in particular the EU, then this will apply to you. Right. So you have to make sure your products, services, and digital platforms are compliant. They don't set a particular standard, but the recommended is obviously WCAG 2.2 AA standard. So you've got to make sure any sort of videos that you're posting in the EU market, for example, that will have closed captions, any help desk services that you're providing for customers in the EU, that's going to make sure that they are accessible for people with any particular access needs. Digital platforms, so any apps which are being used in the EU market, again, they're going to make sure that they are being compliant with this particular standard as well. I'm going to go through this in a bit more detail in the next slide. So what it basically means is any audio visual media accessibility needs to make sure you've got the closed captions in there as well. For example, you've got audio description for any videos that you're publishing. Banking accessibility. So if you're a bank, then obviously you've got to make sure that you are accessible for someone in the EU market. Assistive technologies. Now, those are things that people who have hearing disabilities or visual disabilities, you've got to make sure they are going to be able to access your website with any additional technology that they might be using. Electronic communications, so emails, for example, you've got to make sure that they are in certain ways that they're actually making sure that they are being compliant as well. Messaging services, mobile phones, anything like that that you're offering in the EU, that's got to be compliant, but also anything that you're selling in the EU market as well. So any e-commerce, so if you're obviously selling things in the EU, that's again another thing you've got to make sure that the whole process of buying and selling is actually something that's going to be compliant, particularly to this particular law. Businesses, they've got until June 2025 to upgrade accessibility. Now, there will be a few years grace upon this one. We're not expecting, June 29th for it to be a point of actually saying, well, actually, we're going to have people coming around and obviously doing legal checks and so on. There will be a couple of years grace upon this as well. And also, it usually would be individual people. If they can't access a particular service, then they might have some sort of legal means, or they might try and sue a particular company or website. So it's all about mostly upon the individual, for example, and what sort of steps will be taken to get that accessibility as part of that as well. Who this applies to, so any business with at least 10 staff and a turnover of 1.5 million, which again, that 1.5 million sounds like a lot, but actually for most companies, it's really not. It applies to any business that trades in the EU. Companies headquartered inside or outside of the EU still applies to you. It's about where your market is. It's about who the people are that you're selling to. You got to make sure it's compliant for those people. Right? UK specific equivalent is expected to come from the UK. We don't know when. Chances are this is going to be a bit of a sort of testing ground for the UK government, and then they'll see how it goes, and then they might implement their own. But again, we do still have some of our UK legislation anyway. So we've got the Equality Act, for example, which could still have legal means for discrimination for people who are disabled, for example. But in terms of big things that are coming up on the horizon, this is definitely one of those. And this is the course then. Are there any questions on those things before I just move on to the course? Just the last couple of slides. No, all good. So what you can see there, so this is a 24-month program. It's split across 6 units, so it can be between 18 to 24 months. And that is usually because obviously we can tailor the program. So for example, it's like say if you're really good at HTML, for example, you might need a whistle stop tour on that, and then we might spend more time on the legislation, for example. So it can be kind of tailored, and you can pick and choose areas that you want to be looking at. So then you got your intro to digital accessibility, context and guidelines. So these are the WCAG and the laws and the legislation and so on I've just been talking about. The tech and techniques. So this one's talking about the more sort of technological side of it. So what sort of assistive technologies are being used? What sort of product suites do we actually tend to have as well? HTML and other things that might factor as part of that. Unit 4, integrating accessibility in tech. This is about actually starting accessibility from the ground up. Rather than thinking about it as being an add-on that you think about much later on, how do you project manage something and build something from the get-go, from the start, and how do we kind of build that in all the way throughout? Business application. So again, what reasonable adjustments might need to be made, and how does that then link with the Equality Act, for example? Tailoring communications for different user groups. So that will be looking at actually, let's say, know your market. Who is it that you're going for, but also make sure you're trying to cast as wide a net as possible without obviously causing too much strenuous workload on everyone else. Unit 6 then, security and GDPR. So something quite interesting actually, that with one of the overlays for WordPress, for example, if you grant permission for one of the overlays, that actually then might also grant permissions for other websites as well. So that might be stored in the memory, and therefore any other websites that you go on and use that same overlay for example, then that might give away certain information. So that might tell that particular website that you are disabled, because of course you've had to access that particular WordPress, that overlay is access your assistive technology. So therefore any subsequent websites that you go on will then tell that person or that user of that website that you are disabled, which is part of that GDPR. This is information that the user might not want anyone else to know. So this is where security and GDPR does play an important part in this as well. The endpoint assessment, you've got 3 different parts of it. You've got assessment method 1, 2, and 3. Work-based project. So you'll be assessed upon this, where you will be looked at what particular project do you want to do for your organizations, what's going to have a fundamental and important role for your organization, and that's what your project-based report will be on, and what your project will be on. So it could be something like you might want to work on a particular app that you've got and make sure it's accessible for different assistive technologies. Then obviously that's where you can tailor your particular project towards that. You've got a knowledge test. So this one is, you've got just a multiple choice question. So there's 45 questions, and you'll be asking you different things about like what is WCAG, which one is the best suited for this particular user, just different multiple choice questions. And then you've got your professional discussion. Based upon everything you've done there, the independent quality assessor will ask you about your project report or about your particular project that you've been doing, and then basically asking you like about this point, that point, and so on and so forth. That's across those 3 areas. Andrew, you got a question?
There's a couple of American airlines recently that were taken to court, and it was about people giving their data before they put the ticket. So the demographic, age, where they live, postal code, so they can work out an algorithm, presumably what to charge them. So does that GDPR sort of fall in to that accessibility, that if you're trying to find your customers' needs by finding out the right information, but would you fall into, if they went through an overlay, that you're breaking that GDPR?
So it obviously depends on legislation in terms of locality. So obviously the American example would be different from the UK example, because obviously GDPR applying obviously to the UK there. So it depends on obviously what sort of permissions have been allowed realistically. So what the overlay is asking, really, I think that's the main point about it. There's quite loads of different sort of overlays, and each one of them is individual. So like I say, I've used WordPress, for example, but obviously there's loads of others as well. So it would be very much dependent on which sort of overlay is being used. But realistically, it's about actually how they access that, and actually how the assistive technology works with that particular overlay. And I think that is, again, it's almost like without even thinking about it, they've broken that sort of GDPR ruling. So I wouldn't have said it was a deliberate deliberate that they'd done that, but it was probably just a mistake. Actually, really, it was a bit of an oversight, I think, realistically anyway. But in terms of actually, it's going to be on a case-by-case sort of basis, I think, with those sorts of things anyway. But it is definitely something that, from an accessibility point of view, you need to be very sort of conscious of, and obviously that's something we have to think about. So yes, you might be making sure you're doing the accessibility compliance side of stuff, but actually you might fall foul of the GDPR side of stuff as well, which is another reason why we try and blend those two things together. So
Thank you.
hopefully that kind of answers your question.
Yeah.
May have done, may not have done. And final point then. So what we've tried to do as an organisation then, in terms of an accessibility point of view, is that we've actually tried to make sure that our learning materials are accessible as possible. So that was a big thing for me from a teaching perspective as well. It's unfortunate to note that actually, from an education point of view, accessibility scores the lowest. So if you're looking at sectors, if you're looking at the engineering sector, the education sector, the retail sector, education is probably one of the worst performing for accessibility, where actually like a lot of materials we're putting out there, a lot of the different sort of interactive learning modules we put out there, they are not good for accessibility. So we've tried to be as best as we possibly can be. We're not going to be perfect. I'm going to hold my hands up and say that, but we are trying to use this as a process. All right. So the program that we use is called iSpring. You can see there at the bottom left-hand corner. So we have interactive learning modules. So before you kind of delve too much into one particular area, we'd have this online self-guided course where you'll follow it and say, actually, what do these terms mean? You have a little quiz in there. There might be little activities in there as well. Just kind of gives you a basic sort of information before we start to delve into the more nitty-gritty of some of the tasks that you might be asked to do. And on the right-hand side there, you might see the icon with the glasses. That is the accessibility button. Now, I know earlier on I spoke about that wasn't just the only way of doing stuff, but actually, you know, this does have that built in, and we have tried to work as best as we can. But of course, that doesn't replace me helping individuals, for example. But it is there if people need it. So that will take the image on the left and it will translate and turn it into what is on the right-hand side there. So you've got much clearer text, you've got a clearer background, for example, you've reduced the non-essential images in there as well. So again, if people have maybe cognitive impairments, for example, or if they've got visual impairments, then that might be a more suitable function for them to use as well. And that's why we've tried to make sure that we're delivering this as best as we possibly can. We deliver this face-to-face online, so very much just like the way I'm doing it now. I can drop in, give you a 20-minute session, or we can have our usual sort of 2-hour workshop sort of sessions, whatever works best for you. That's a one-to-one small groups, we can do that. We've got the built-in accessibility functions, tailored solutions for individuals and organizational needs. I think I've mentioned that already. You've got bite-sized learning accessible from all platforms. So again, that iSpring, if you want to use it on a laptop, if you want to use it on your mobile phone, that's perfectly fine. Doesn't matter. It's accessible across all different formats as well as part of that. So again, trying to make sure we're as accessible as we possibly can be. And if not, we'll try and change that. So that's basically it there then. So we've got our website on there as well, as a phone number on there, customer service. You can also email us. We're also on LinkedIn as well, so feel free to have a little look for us on LinkedIn as well. So you have got my email address, so everyone who has attended this as well should have hopefully had my emails circulated in the past couple of days. If not, I'll send out another one after this as well, just say you've got any interest and so on, and then just feel free, and then we'll start a discussion, and then we'll move on from there. Final thing that we do, so it can be in contact with you individually if you think that's a better way of doing it. What we do, make sure we're working one-to-one with the employer and the learner to make sure we know that this is the best program possible for you. So IAG there means information and guidance, and that's where we're going to have that one-to-one discussion with you to give you more information about the course, more things that you might want to know about, but also making sure it's applicable for both you, the learner, and also the employer as well. So I say we've been enrolling since November. It's a roll-on, roll-off sort of program. It's not a case of we don't enroll in just January or just September. If you want to start at the end of this month, that's fine. We can do that. If you want to delay it a little bit later on, that's fine. We can do it like that. And that way, we have small caseloads, we are able to be a bit more flexible with enrollment dates as well. And then, so yes, the tailored support all the way through, but that's basically it from me. So if you've got any questions, I'm more than happy to stick around for a few more minutes. But I say if you don't have any questions, then I will circulate an email around to everyone who's attended, just in case you do want to get in touch with any particular questions that you want to discuss later on as well. All right, but feel free to stick around, ask any questions if you feel the need to. If not, then you are free to leave at any point, but I'll be in touch soon. Thank you very much. Thank you, Josie.
Thank you.
Andrew, any questions?
I didn't want to take the space until someone else asked the question, really. Okay, so I found you on Eventbrite a couple of hours ago,
Uh-huh.
and I was searching for ADHD, autism, things to do with that. From a personal point of view, and from the point of view how it help others by gaining the knowledge to open up accessibility. So I'm not 100% sure this is the right direction for me, but it's given me some great information. But I'm certainly interested in upping skills for my business. And my business partner was hoping to come along. She does stuff for airlines and she trains airlines and so forth. But
Okay.
so if I'll send the video to her, if I may,
Yeah, that's fine.
and she might have some questions. Being neurodiverse at the moment has become more of a topic that's able to be discussed. So yeah, I'm interested, but I'm not sure what direction this would take me in. That's my question.
Well, I can actually the interesting point with that one, as I say, we can have a conversation, a bit more about also your individual needs, your business needs, for example, as well. So we can discuss that, a separate point as well. So also we can have like some other discussions, so I can bring some other people in as part of that as well. Looking from a business sort of aspect of it as well, but also obviously how that will obviously benefit you guys as well, and then just obviously give you some ideas about actually the actual mechanics of the business behind it and so on as well. So we can obviously discuss that a little bit further on as well, and then just kind of see how we go from there and how this would develop into your sort of day to day, because the apprenticeship being, you could have someone existing in your employment structure, and they maybe set across maybe an afternoon a week, for example, or they might set across a day a week to do this particular program. So the whole idea was to try and fit around the employer as best as we possibly can to make sure you're getting the most out of this as well.
It's a good way to retain staff as well, isn't it? Because if they're going to stay with you for the next 2 years because they're doing a course,
Yeah,
it's
most
a bit of a
definitely.
buy-in from both point of views, and it shows the staff commitment. Worked in sales for a long period of time. There's normally a 2-year window, so it's interesting to see what retainment of staff that would also do as well.
Yeah, well, the thing is, obviously, you got the 2 years there, but I mean, obviously, that's the sort of length of the program. We can tailor the program as best as we can do. It's an 18 to 24-month program. We say that 18 to 24 months because we think that's the sort of realistic sort of time frame in which it might actually take as well. We wouldn't say someone can get through the program in about 16 months. I mean, if you're really good with everything, I would like to say that you could do, but I didn't want to think that you've been taking like 4 days out of your work week every week to get this program done. It's all about a manageable sort of diet of it realistically, and making sure you're getting the most out of it, but also the learner is getting the most out of it as well. But you are right. I mean, the accessibility side of things, it's getting much bigger now, which is good. But I still think there's a lot of misconceptions in the area. People don't quite understand what it is. Also, sometimes when you say, "Oh, let's work on accessibility," and they think they're talking to the disabled user market. Well, actually, no, it's not. It's essential for some, but useful for all, right? So there's always a term that I try and use an awful lot. It's what W3C use, but it's also making sure we've got that sort of dialogue that actually is continuing. It's really good that we are only one of 2 providers that are offering this apprenticeship. So there's us and a competitor, so the Purple Beard. But I mean, they've got much bigger caseloads. So of course, I'm going to make sure that we, keep our caseloads down so that we can offer that much more bespoke course to it as well. But again, it shows that actually this should be bigger. There should be more people offering this as a training provider, but actually there's only 2 of us. And we're both on the same sort of journey. We're both about the same sort of length of time in developing our program and where we are. So Purple haven't actually got any learners learners progressing all the way through their program yet. They're basically, they're about a few months into this. So again, it's just trying to make sure we're increasing that sort of dialogue around accessibility and making sure people understand it a lot better. Yeah, so Andrew, so if you want to set up a, so I'll drop you an email anyway.
Yeah, please do.
And then, yeah, we can obviously continue a bit of a discussion from there.
Thank you.
Lovely. All right. Well, thank you for your questions anyway, Andrew. It's really good. Anyone else? So I see Jen. So you've got some good questions, some good points. Active in the neurodivergent accessibility space. Yes, that's good. So if you've got some area of expertise within that particular area as well, that's always really good, because again, it's always good having working knowledge, but also obviously those professional sort of accreditations to it as well. Obviously, there's other areas that people probably wouldn't really have thought about as well as part of that. But yeah, any sort of reasonable adjustments as well. They're obviously always really quite interesting to actually kind of see how those work together as well from that particular space. All right. So yeah, so if everyone's happy, no other questions, I'll just give you another minute or so. Like I say, I will be in touch, and then hopefully we can have a bit more of a discussion afterwards. All right. Thank you, Andrew. All right. Thank you, Jen.